My name is Cassidy Hartwell. I'm 26 years old. I grew up in a small town called Mill Haven, Kentucky, wearing secondhand clothes and eating peanut butter sandwiches while my cousins talked about their ski trips. My grandmother, Loretta Voss, lived in a two-room house at the edge of town, cracked linoleum floors, a porch swing that groaned every time the wind moved it. She kept a jar of hard candy on the counter and a Bible on the nightstand, and every single person in my family assumed she was as poor as she looked. They were wrong. When Loretta died, I was the only one at her graveside who cried. Not because the others didn't show up, they did. They showed up 2 days later when the lawyer called. What that lawyer told me in a conference room in Louisville changed everything. It didn't just change my life, it blew my entire family apart like a match dropped in a dry field. And what happened after that? That's the story I need to tell you. Before I tell you what my family tried to take from me and what my grandmother secretly built, if stories like this mean something to you, take a second to like and subscribe, and tell me where you're listening from. I read every single comment. The call came on a Wednesday, October, early enough that the leaves hadn't fully turned yet. I was in my apartment in Lexington, grading essays for the community college where I taught freshman composition. The voice on the other end was calm. Loretta Voss had passed in the night, peacefully, in her sleep. I sat on the edge of my couch and stared at the wall. My grandmother had raised me, practically speaking. My mother, Renata Hartwell, loved the idea of motherhood more than the actual work of it. She was glamorous in a small town way, always dressed like she was about to go somewhere important. When I was 6, she started leaving me at Loretta's house for weekends that stretched into weeks. By the time I was 10, Loretta was the one packing my lunch and helping me with homework and sitting in the front row at every school play. She wasn't soft about it. Loretta Voss didn't do soft. She was firm and quiet and consistent in a way that felt, to a little girl with an unreliable mother, like the most beautiful thing in the world. She used to say, "Cassidy, the only thing that outlasts money is character. Build your character first." I heard that sentence so many times it became part of my bones. I called my mother first. Renata picked up on the second ring. "Oh," she said. A pause. "Well, was it peaceful?" "Yes," I said. "Good. Let me know about the service." That was it. No tears, just a woman filing away information she'd deal with later. I called my cousin Tanner next. He answered immediately, which should have told me something. "Hey," he said. "Did she have a will?" I hung up. Loretta was buried in Mill Haven Community Cemetery on a gray Friday morning. My mother came in a black dress too nice for a small-town burial. She stood slightly apart from everyone, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue she never actually needed. Gerald came, Loretta's only son. He drove 4 hours from Nashville and spent most of the service looking at his phone. Cousin Tanner stood beside his father, tall and restless, shifting his weight like a man waiting for a starting pistol. I stood closest to the grave. The chaplain said a prayer I barely heard. The wind moved through the bare November trees, and the sky was the flat gray of old dishwater. I kept thinking about the last time I'd visited Loretta, 3 weeks before she passed. She'd made us both coffee, sat across from me at that kitchen table, and said, "Cassidy, I need you to remember something. The size of a life isn't measured by the size of the house." I'd nodded and thought she was just being philosophical. She was being specific. She was telling me something she couldn't say outright. When the service ended, the other mourners drifted away quickly. It was cold. Nobody lingered. Renata said something about needing to beat traffic back to Richmond. Gerald checked his phone one last time and followed them to the parking lot. I stayed until the groundskeeper arrived with his equipment and gave me a patient, apologetic look. I drove back to her house afterward and let myself in with the key she'd given me when I was 16. The house smelled like her, peppermint and cedar, and the faint ghost of coffee soaked permanently into the walls. I sat at her kitchen table and opened the drawer where she kept her important papers. Inside, behind church bulletins and an old phone bill, was a sealed envelope with my name on it. Below my name, in smaller letters, "Open this before you talk to anyone." Inside was a business card for a law firm in Louisville, Hargrove and Wills Estate Attorneys, and a handwritten note, "Tell them I sent you. Go alone." I drove to Louisville the next morning without telling anyone. The attorney's name was Franklin Wills. 60s, silver-haired, the kind of man who chose his words like a surgeon chooses instruments. He opened a leather folder on his desk and told me the story in measured, careful sentences. Loretta Voss, in addition to being a retired school teacher who lived in a two-room house, had also been a co-investor in a Louisville real estate development project in 1987. A young developer had approached her with an opportunity in a depressed part of downtown. She'd given him $18,000, her entire savings, accumulated over 20 years of teaching. Most people thought she was foolish. The development succeeded, then expanded. Then, over 3 decades, became one of the most valuable mixed-use commercial corridors in the state. Loretta's investment, carefully managed and structured through a foundation she established quietly in 2005, had grown. Franklin folded his hands on the desk. "The current value of the trust," he said, "is $12,400,000. The room tilted sideways. The trust existed for one purpose. Loretta had watched her hometown slowly collapse. Millhaven had been losing jobs, losing young people, losing school programs and library funding for decades. The trust funded educational scholarships for Millhaven students, small business grants for local entrepreneurs, and preservation of the town's only public library, which had been on the verge of closing 3 times in the past decade. In 19 years, 83 college scholarships, 19 small business loans, the library kept open through 3 budget crises. Your grandmother designated you as the sole successor trustee. You and no other family member have any role in its administration." He reached into the folder and removed a sealed envelope. My name on the front. Loretta's handwriting. I held it and felt the weight of everything I hadn't known pressing against my ribs. I read it in my car in the parking garage. Engine off. "Cassidy, if you're reading this, I'm gone, and Franklin has told you the truth I kept from everyone. Every dollar I kept for myself was a dollar someone in worse shape didn't get. Millhaven is dying. I couldn't stop that alone, but I could give young people a reason to come back. I could keep the library open. I could help someone start a bakery or a repair shop or a daycare. Your mother will want this money. Gerald will want it. Tanner will come up with a reason why he deserves it. They'll tell you I was confused or that blood comes first. Don't believe any of it. I love your mother. I love Gerald. But love doesn't mean handing people something they'll spend in a year and forget in 2. I chose you because you stayed. You came back to Millhaven when everyone told you it wasn't worth coming back to. You became a teacher when everyone said teachers make nothing. You understand what it means to invest in something that doesn't pay you back in cash. Build your character first, Cassidy. You always did. Now protect mine. All my love, Grandma." I read it 4 times, cried twice. Then I folded it carefully, sat very still, and thought about what came next. The parking garage was quiet around me, concrete pillars and the distant sound of a car engine somewhere above. I looked at my hands on the steering wheel and thought about every time I'd sat at Loretta's kitchen table and wondered why she lived the way she did, why the floors were never replaced, why she only bought groceries on sale, why she mended clothes instead of replacing them. I had assumed it was habit, the Depression-era frugality that older women sometimes carried into modern life like a piece of luggage they'd forgotten how to put down. It wasn't habit. It was a decision she made every single morning. Every dollar saved was a dollar directed. She wasn't living small out of necessity. She was living small out of deliberate, disciplined, daily purpose. I sat in that parking garage for 20 minutes before I could drive. My phone buzzed. A text from Tanner. "Hey, when do you think the estate stuff will get sorted out?" The work was already starting. I made one mistake. I told my mother. Not all of it. I told her the broad truth. A charitable trust established for the community with me named as trustee. Renata listened with the stillness of a woman doing math in her head. How much? She asked. I told her. The expression that crossed her face wasn't grief. It was the particular focus of someone who has spotted something valuable and is already calculating how to reach it. That money belongs to this family, she said. It's a charitable trust, Mom. It's not an inheritance. She was my mother. She was also a person who built something with her own savings over 30 years and chose what to do with it. Renata stood. I wore clothes from garage sales my entire childhood. I was embarrassed every single day in this town because your grandmother lived like she was poor, and apparently she was sitting on a fortune. And you're telling me that money goes to strangers? It goes to people in Millhaven. Her jaw tightened. Something moved behind her eyes. Not pain, strategy. I'm going to call Gerald, she said quietly. We'll talk to a lawyer. She picked up her purse and walked out, pulling the door shut behind her with a soft, deliberate click that somehow felt louder than a slam. Uncle Gerald called the next morning, casual and careful. He suggested Loretta might not have been fully capable when she set things up. Tanner texted me a number, a dollar amount. Then, that's what I need for my business. Don't be selfish. Tanner's business was a pressure washing company he'd started and abandoned twice. I called Franklin and told him what was happening. Mrs. Voss anticipated this, he said calmly. The trust is irrevocable. No family member has legal standing. Any challenge will be dismissed, and the opposing party will be liable for costs. He paused. She told me when we drew this up that her daughter would try to take it. Those were her exact words. That's why the exclusion clause is written the way it is. 3 weeks after the funeral, Renata launched her campaign. She understood how information moved through a small community. She knew you didn't need facts to change what people believed. You just needed emotion, repetition, and the right audience. The Facebook post appeared on a Tuesday. She didn't name me directly. She didn't need to. Sometimes you think you know someone. Sometimes a family member decides to take what should be shared and keep it for herself. I lost my mother this month, and now I'm losing what little she left behind. Please pray for me. 62 reactions in 4 hours. Comments flooded in. Family should stick together. Some people show their true colors when money's involved. My phone started buzzing. Cousins I hadn't spoken to in years. A great aunt I'd met maybe 3 times. Cassidy, honey, your mama is really struggling. Can't you work something out? Money isn't worth losing your people over. I didn't respond to any of them. I went to work. I taught my classes. I ran 3 miles in the evenings and thought about Loretta, who said the loudest voices in any room were rarely the wisest. Then Gerald hired a lawyer. 6 weeks after the funeral, Renata organized what she called a family meeting. Gerald's house in Nashville, a big brick colonial purchased on a second mortgage he mentioned at least once a year. Present, Renata, Gerald, Tanner, Gerald's wife Patrice, and Douglas Merritt, an estate attorney willing to take the case on contingency, which told me everything I needed to know about his confidence in their chances. Renata opened with prepared remarks on a legal pad. Mother wasn't herself in her later years. Her judgment was impaired. We believe the documentation may not reflect her true wishes. I let them finish. Then I opened the folder Franklin had prepared. The trust was established in 2005. Loretta was 61 years old. Her physician documented full cognitive capacity, 19 years of clean audits. Merritt shifted in his chair. You're 26 years old, Renata said, a college teacher making $40,000 a year. You think you can manage $12 million? I'm not managing the money, Mom. I'm protecting what it was built to do. The purpose should be this family. The purpose is a town that's been losing its young people for 30 years. Tanner slammed his hand on the table. You're doing this to feel superior. You always acted like you were better than us because you stayed close to Grandma. I stayed close to her because she was worth staying close to. I drove back to Lexington in the dark, hands tight on the wheel, rain hard on the highway. Somewhere around the halfway point, I made a decision. I wasn't going to keep playing defense. The article appeared 11 days after the family meeting. A local news blog in Millhaven published, "Local teacher controls grandmother's secret fortune. Family says they were shut out." Tanner's doing. He'd gone to high school with the site's editor. The story was thin but effective. My mother's version, unquestioned. Me described as having taken control of a fund that rightly belonged to the family. The trust's value mentioned 3 times. By noon, it had been shared in 4 Millhaven community Facebook groups. I sat in my apartment in Lexington, windows dark, and for the first time felt genuinely shaken. Not because of the article, because I could see exactly what my family was doing, and I could see how well it was working, and I wasn't sure I had the tools to fight it. I called Franklin the next morning. "Respond to nothing publicly," he said. "Let them move first. Any legal challenge will be dismissed. Families that feel entitled create a lot of noise. The noise eventually stops. And in the meantime, spend some time understanding exactly what your grandmother built," he said. "It'll remind you why you're doing this." That afternoon, I drove to Millhaven. I started with the library. The Millhaven Public Library sat on the corner of Main and Cypress, a red brick building from 1934. The head librarian, Dottie Crane, poured me tea in her small office and told me the history plainly. 3 times we nearly closed: 2009, 2014, 2020. 3 times a grant arrived, signed with 2 initials, LV. She never asked for acknowledgement, never asked for her name on anything. Dottie looked at me over her reading glasses. "Your grandmother came in here every Thursday morning for 40 years, sat in that chair by the window and read. Never mentioned any of this." I visited 2 scholarship recipients. Marcus Webb, 24, finishing a nursing degree at the University of Kentucky. We met at a coffee shop near campus, and he talked for 45 minutes without me asking many questions. He was the kind of person who carried his story lightly, not because it wasn't heavy, but because he'd made peace with the weight of it. My dad drove a delivery truck. My mom cleaned offices downtown. They worked hard. They just didn't make enough for me to go anywhere. I'd accepted that. He wrapped both hands around his coffee cup. Then this letter arrived, from a foundation I'd never heard of. Full scholarship, no strings, just go. He shook his head slowly. I almost didn't believe it was real. Called Franklin Will's office 3 times to confirm. The 3rd time, his assistant laughed a little. She said, "Mr. Webb, it's real." She was very real. He looked at me across the table. "I didn't know it was your grandmother until you reached out. She never told anyone. That's what gets me. She changed my entire life, and she never once wanted credit for it." And Priscilla Doan, 31, who'd used a small business grant to open a flower shop on Main Street, running 4 years, 3 employees. She came into my shop the spring after I opened, bought flowers every week, never said a word about the grant, just asked how business was going. I drove back through Millhaven's Main Street at sunset. Half the storefronts were empty, but the library lights were on, and Priscilla's flower shop had a light on too. My grandmother did this from a 2-room house, and my family wanted to tear it apart for a pressure washing business and a lifestyle upgrade. That evening, I called Franklin and told him I was ready. Franklin called me 2 days later with news I hadn't anticipated. The article had been picked up by a regional Kentucky news site, but this version included a comment from Marcus Webb, signed with his full name and Trust Scholarship recipient. Marcus had written publicly about what Loretta's trust had done for him. 4 paragraphs, plain and specific. He described growing up in Millhaven, watching his parents work double shifts, believing college wasn't for people from his street. Then a letter arrived his senior year with a scholarship offer from a foundation he'd never heard of. "I'm going to be a nurse," he wrote. "I'm going to come back to Millhaven and work at the clinic. I don't know who's trying to tear apart what she built, but I'm standing here to say, don't." Priscilla shared it with a comment of her own. By the next morning, it had been shared 2,000 times. A Louisville education nonprofit picked it up. A regional veterans advocacy group shared it. A journalist at the Louisville Courier-Journal named Simone Albright emailed Franklin's office asking if anyone connected to the trust would speak on the record. The story had found its own oxygen. Loretta's actual work had lit the match. My mother's Facebook comment section was turning, strangers flooding in. "This is the trust your daughter is protecting? The one funding scholarships and keeping libraries open? And you're upset she won't hand it over to the family?" Renata began deleting comments. She couldn't keep up. I called Franklin. "They've invited a journalist to the family reunion. The question," he said, "is whether you want to tell the story or let the story tell itself. I'll talk to Simone, but not until after the reunion." Every summer, the Hartwell and Voss extended family gathered at Gerald's house. Lawn chairs, potato salad, the particular tension of people who are related pretending they genuinely like each other. This year, Renata planned to use it. 40 family members assembled, Renata presiding, the full weight of social pressure aimed at me like a spotlight. Agree publicly or be the villain in front of everyone. She'd also invited Simone Albright, framing it as a family attempting to resolve a dispute. She wanted a reporter watching when I either caved or got destroyed. Fine. If she wanted witnesses, I'd bring mine. I called Marcus Webb, then Priscilla, then Dottie Crane. I explained what was happening. "We'll come," Marcus said, without hesitation. Gerald's backyard on a Saturday afternoon in June. Humid southern heat, ceiling fans running full speed, 41 family members, long tables of food, and Simone Albright near the back porch with a glass of sweet tea and a notebook in her lap. Renata moved through the crowd with the focused energy of a woman running a campaign. At 3 o'clock, she called everyone together. She started gently, a tribute to Loretta, warmly told. Then, seamlessly, the shift. "As most of you know, we've discovered that Loretta left behind something significant, and unfortunately, our Cassidy has been led to believe this money isn't ours." She looked at me across the crowd. 40 faces followed. "I don't blame Cassidy," Renata said, which meant she did. "But I'm asking, in front of everyone who loved Loretta, that we come together and do the right thing." Murmurs, nods. Simone's pen moved. I stood up. The yard went quiet. My grandmother, Loretta Voss, was a school teacher in Millhaven for 34 years. She made $41,000 at her peak salary. She drove the same car for 18 years. She wore the same winter coat for 12. I looked at Renata. In 1987, she invested her entire life savings because she believed it would eventually help Millhaven. For 19 years, she quietly funded college scholarships for kids who thought college wasn't for people like them, kept the library open through 3 budget crises, and gave small business grants to people trying to build something, without telling a single person in this family. I paused. Not because she didn't love us, because she knew if she told us, this exact conversation would happen 20 years early. Gerald cleared his throat. "That's a very nice story, but the fact remains, I have some people here who can tell you what that money actually meant." I looked toward the side gate. Marcus Webb walked in, quiet and confident. Priscilla Doan beside him, carrying a small bundle of flowers she'd brought without me asking. And Dottie Crane, reading glasses on her beaded chain, looking around with the serene expression of a woman who has seen much worse than this. 40 people went absolutely still. Marcus spoke first, the way people talk when the truth needs no decoration. "My name is Marcus Webb. I grew up on Cypress Street in Millhaven. My parents worked 2 jobs each. I didn't think I was going to college. Loretta Voss's trust paid my full scholarship. I'm going to be a nurse. I'm coming home to work at the Millhaven Clinic." He looked at Renata.
I didn't know it was her until last month. She never said a word. Priscilla told her story simply. The grant, the flower shop, the Thursday morning visits. She never once mentioned the money. She just bought flowers. Dottie spoke from her chair. The Millhaven Public Library has been open for 92 years. It came within 3 weeks of closing in 2009. Loretta's trust saved it. Again in 2014. Some of you in this yard went to school in Millhaven. You checked books out of that library. You still can because of what Loretta chose to do with money that was entirely hers. Someone near the back started clapping, then a table near the food. Then, one by one, the whole yard. Not polite applause, the kind that comes from the chest. Renata stood frozen at the center of it all.
Renata reached for the composure she'd built over 50 years of small-town social life. For the first time in my memory, it wasn't enough. "This is my mother's money," she said, her voice cracked. "I grew up embarrassed. I wore clothes from donation bins. I lied about where we lived. And she chose those people over her own daughter." Marcus Webb spoke quietly. "Ma'am, she chose kids who had even less." The yard went very still. Not the polite stillness of people waiting for the next thing to happen, the deeper stillness of people understanding something they hadn't understood before. Renata turned to me. Her mascara, for the first time all afternoon, had started to go. "You brought them here to humiliate me." "I brought them because you invited a journalist," I said, "and I wanted her to hear the whole story." I took a breath. This next part I meant completely. "I'm sorry, Mom. Not for protecting the trust, not for bringing Marcus and Priscilla and Dottie, but for the thing underneath all of it, the wound that predated all of this by 50 years. I'm sorry she didn't explain it to you while she still could. I'm sorry you found out this way, in front of people, without warning. You deserved better than that." Renata stared at me. Whatever she'd expected me to say, it wasn't that. "But I cannot break what she built," I said quietly, "and I won't." Gerald walked away from the grill and went inside. Tanner followed without making eye contact with anyone. Simone came to find me near the food table. "Miss Hartwell, I was brought here to write one story. I'm going to write a different one." The gathering dissolved. Most guests stopped to shake Marcus's hand on the way out. Several came to me. "We had no idea. Your grandmother sounds incredible." Douglas Merritt, the attorney Gerald had hired, called Gerald the following morning and withdrew from the case. Tanner told me later the call lasted 4 minutes. He said it was unwinnable and he didn't want his name on it, Tanner said. He sounded deflated, not repentant, just tired. Simone Albright's piece ran in the Louisville Courier-Journal 12 days after the reunion. The headline, "The Millhaven Schoolteacher Who Quietly Changed Her Town and the Family Fight That Couldn't Stop Her." Simone had done her reporting. Interviews with Marcus, Priscilla, Dottie, and Franklin Wills. She'd pulled Loretta's original 1987 investment records. She'd spoken to the Louisville developer, now in his 70s. "She was the first investor who called me back," he told Simone. "Everyone else said I was dreaming. Loretta said, 'I believe in this city. Tell me where to sign.'" The article described the trust's charitable purpose and the family's attempt to redirect its assets. It didn't name Renata or Gerald directly. It didn't need to. Everyone at the reunion knew exactly who it meant. By afternoon, the article had been shared 40,000 times. By evening, it was in 3 Kentucky education nonprofit newsletters. A national network shared it to 500,000 followers. Renata's Facebook post came down at 11 a.m., but screen caps were already circulating. Gerald lost a Nashville business contract. The developer's assistant told Gerald's receptionist the boss had seen the article. Tanner's pressure washing business lost a Millhaven contract to another vendor. Merritt's withdrawal meant the legal challenge evaporated. The financial damage? Attorney fees across 2 lawyers, lost business opportunities, social standing that would take years to recover. The financial gain for the trust?
$78,000 in unsolicited donations arrived in 3 weeks. A retired Louisville teacher sent $10,000 with a note for Loretta. I wish I'd known. Dottie Crane called me on a Tuesday evening. We're getting letters from all over Kentucky. People want to donate books, volunteer hours, funding. Your grandmother's story is bringing people to us. I thought about the woman who signed her letters with initials and bought flowers every Thursday. I wish she had hated this, I said. Yes, said Dottie warmly. She absolutely would have.
Renata called me at 12:40 in the morning, 6 weeks after the article. Her voice was different, no strategy, just a woman in her 50s talking to her daughter in the dark. I wore the same 4 outfits to school every week for 3 years, she said. Kids asked me why I never wore anything new. I made up stories about sending clothes to a cousin. I asked her once, I was 12. I asked her why we never had nice things. She said, Renata, nice things don't keep you warm. I thought she was just poor. She was protecting it, I said. She'd already decided. I know that now, but I grew up ashamed. I grew up thinking my mother didn't care enough to buy me a winter coat, and she had. Her voice broke. I know, Mom. I'm angry at her, she said, and she's gone and I can't. The real grief underneath everything, not for the money, for the girl who wore the same 4 outfits and never got to ask the question now that she finally understood the answer. I can't undo what she built, I said, and I believe it was right, but I know it cost something, Mom. I know that. The line was quiet for a long time. I'm not ready to say she was wrong, Renata said finally. You don't have to be, not tonight. The call ended softly. I sat with it, the way Loretta taught me to sit with hard things, still and straight and without flinching. I moved into Loretta's house in November, fixed the floors, repainted the porch, planted yellow flowers along the front walk because yellow was the color of stubbornness, and I intended to be stubborn about this for a very long time. I still drove to Lexington twice a week to teach. On weekends, I managed the trust, reviewed scholarship applications, visited Marcus at the clinic, stopped by Priscilla's flower shop every Thursday morning. The trust held a board meeting in February. Between existing assets and post-article donations, the fund stood at $12,700,000. The board voted to add career training grants for adults in Millhaven returning to the workforce. And one addition I proposed, a fellowship for student teachers from rural Kentucky schools named the Loretta Voss Teaching Fellowship, funded at $40,000 per year. Franklin looked at me across the conference table. He would have argued with you about putting her name on it. I know, I said. That's exactly why I'm doing it. 3 months after the board meeting, the Kentucky Rural Education Coalition held its annual awards dinner in Louisville. They'd read Simone's article. They invited me to speak. I almost said no. Public speaking wasn't something I sought out. But then I thought about what Loretta had done for 19 years. She'd stayed invisible so the work could be visible. Maybe it was time someone made the work visible by name. I stood at the podium in a room of 200 educators, administrators, and community leaders. The room was quiet in the way that feels like an invitation. My grandmother, Loretta Voss, never asked for a plaque. She never asked for her name on a building or a program or a press release. She invested $18,000 in 1987 because she believed in a city and a town that most people had written off. And then she spent the next 38 years quietly making sure the people who were born into that town had a reason to stay. I looked out at the room. She asked one thing, that the people she helped would go on to help others. That's what this trust is. That's what she built. The room gave a standing ovation. I held on to the edges of the podium and thought, she would have been mortified. She also would have been proud. Tanner called in March. He'd seen the Courier-Journal follow-up piece profiling 3 scholarship recipients. He mentioned a man named Clint Barrow, who'd come back to Millhaven and opened a contracting business on a small grant. I don't know if I could qualify for something like that, Tanner said slowly. I thought carefully before answering. The grants are for Millhaven residents with a viable plan and demonstrated commitment to the community. I can't make decisions, that's the board's process,
but I can send you the application. A long pause. Yeah, he said. Send it. Whether he filled it out or not, I didn't know yet, but the conversation was different. That was something. Renata came to Loretta's house in April. She knocked, which was something Renata had never done. She stood on the porch holding a cardboard box, no makeup, looking smaller than usual, the way people look when they've put down something heavy. I found these in Gerald's attic, she said. Thought you should have them. Photographs. Loretta at 22, chalk on her fingers, grinning at whoever held the camera. Loretta at the Louisville development site in 1987, hard hat slightly too big. Loretta in the library cutting a ribbon, Dottie Crane beside her, both of them laughing. Loretta in her front yard holding a yellow flower, squinting into the sun. Come in, I said.
She stepped across the threshold, first time in 5 years. She stood in the living room and turned slowly, taking in the bones of the place, the floorboards, the curtains, the shelf of books Loretta had read twice each. She really loved this place, Renata said. She loved what it let her do, live without pretense, keep giving. She sat down at the kitchen table in Loretta's chair. I poured her coffee, French press, Loretta's recipe. She held the cup with both hands. I'm not ready to say she was right, she said. I know. But I'm here. That's enough for today, Mom. We sat in Loretta's kitchen while the April light came through the window, and we didn't speak, and we didn't need to. Sometimes showing up is the beginning of something you don't have words for yet. On a Saturday morning in May, I sat at Loretta's kitchen table and opened the trust ledger. 83 scholarship recipients, each one a name and a story, each one a kid from Millhaven who thought the future was somewhere else and found out it could happen right here. I'd started going through the older entries, names from the early 2000s, kids who were now in their 30s and 40s, living lives that Loretta quietly made possible. A woman named Destiny Prater, who was now a high school principal in Lexington. A man named Joel Ashford, who ran an HVAC company in Louisville with 12 employees. 83 lives that branched outward into other lives, into communities Loretta had never visited and names she'd never known. That was the thing about what she built. It didn't stop at 83. Every scholarship recipient who went on to do something good, every small business that hired local people, every morning the library opened its doors, that was Loretta too. She wasn't in any of those rooms. Her name wasn't on any of those doors, but she was in the architecture of it, in the foundation that nobody saw. I thought about what she'd said at the end of that last visit. The size of a life isn't measured by the size of the house. She was right. She was almost always right. I turned to the next blank page. I picked up a pen. 84. Marcus Webb, nursing degree, University of Kentucky. Loretta Voss Trust Scholarship, 2019. Returning to Millhaven Clinic, 2025. The first entry in my handwriting in a ledger full of hers. The list was continuing. Outside, the yellow flowers along the front walk were in full bloom, stubborn and bright against the dark soil, exactly the way Loretta would have wanted it. A Carolina wren was singing from the porch railing, loud and certain and completely unbothered by anything. I closed the ledger, pulled on my jacket, locked the front door, and walked toward the day like a woman who knew exactly what she was carrying and why. Build your character first. She told me that my whole life. I finally understood what she meant.